The Rheeality Podcast. Real conversations about life, love, and business. With me, Jason Rhee. This is The Rheeality. Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in the Rheeality Podcast. We have Hank Paul visiting from Australia.
Hey, g'day, mate.
Good day, mate.
No,
Is that good?
I'm putting that on. I'm sorry. Hey,
No,
how are you,
please.
Jason?
I can hear you talk honestly, maybe we can dub my podcast with your voice.
I'd be down. I'm here for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just pay me a lot of money and I'll do it.
Oh, oops about that. Thank you so much for coming in.
Have a good one.
Hank is an amazing photographer who also spent a lot of time educating on LGBTQIA+++. And we had the opportunity to do an episode of his podcast, First Look, which you have to hear it. It's so well done that it makes me feel like such a little Craigslist production here. Not a reflection of Noah. Noah's amazing. It's more so just how educated he is and how much time you put into the content. I really have to say, it's so much more than a conversation, your podcast.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, it's a documentary.
When I set out, bit of context. First Look is my kind of first attempt at this type of podcast project. I have another weekly podcast that I do with a friend of mine based in Texas. But First Look is a podcast that I wanted to do as just a limited series that looked at the impact that marriage equality was having on the wedding industry, which is an industry that you and I both work in, and that's kind of how we got connected. But when I set out to do it, I didn't want it to just be a set of conversations of just, what today is, which is great. Yeah. No shade.
Yeah.
But really what I thought about what's my favorite type of podcast to listen to. And I love all that NPR serial shit.
Yeah.
Give me that
that's
highbrow, high production value.
Yeah, I call that educated. Mine is what they call a ramble, I think. I think it's called a ramble podcast.
Yeah. We search up ramble podcasts and you're in the top 100 of those, yes. You are the best rambler I know, Jason.
Great. Thank you.
So I set out to make this really polished podcast, and then this is I shouldn't name anyone, but you go and listen and you'll find out soon enough. But first interview of the whole project for me, the first person that I sat down to interview, and they were just sitting in a living room with a fan blowing and the air conditioning and the crows cawing outside. And I was like, I'm trying to make something beautiful and the audio content that you're giving me makes my ears cringe. And so that was the very early stages of me putting together this project. And then I had 9 more interviews, and what I did with all those interviews is I gave everyone a heads up, hey, you got to turn the air conditioner off, and hey, we want to be in a good private space where you're not going to get interrupted by kids.
Yeah.
So I think for the most part, people really wanted to kind of level up their audio recording quality so that it could be something. And then, oh my gosh, this is so tangential. I don't know. I don't even know where we're going with this podcast today.
Keep going. I love it.
But then I had planned out I mapped out the whole production, and it was all going to kind of finish up literally on the, in terms of recording and writing, because I've written a lot of narration for it, and I was going to finish it all up completely ready to be published the day that I was flying out to come to the States, which was, as of today when we're recording, that was 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I was supposed to have finished everything 6 weeks ago. And what happened was the week before I left, I brought on a new team member in my business and I had to onboard them, and I was not at all prepared for onboarding. So I spent the entire last week before I was leaving onboarding this team member to make sure that when I go overseas, they're all sorted.
The business is running, yeah.
And so then the podcast just completely took a back seat. So now what I'm doing is I'm on the road, traveling supposedly for fun.
Yeah.
And I'm finishing writing and recording my podcast. I'm literally in my friend's closet with a blanket over my head and this cheap microphone from Target, just recording this, the next episode that's got to go out tomorrow. So
oh my gosh.
That's been my entire trip. And
you literally could have come up here and just used the setup.
Well, I didn't even think of it, Jason. Didn't even think of it.
I mean, it's a really great listen, and I think you achieved the. It feels so professional in the sense of it was so well thought, and I just had to shout that out because again, you know. And you can hear my, you know, my little quips and my little voice in there, but you made me again sound so much more sophisticated.
No, but Jason, your little snippets, every single time I came to use one of your little, snippets, I just said the same word twice, but whatever. Every single time I'm like, you've summed up everything that I was thinking in such a short amount of words. I've just got to place you here. But then I want to say something poignant to then like hit it home, but you've already said the poignant thing.
Interesting.
So you were too smart for my podcast.
Oh shit. Well, I mean, can we just make sure that we keep that audio bite and we just remind myself that, because I definitely don't feel like I'm in any way educated. I really do feel like I've been operating based on feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's how I built my business. I built everything based on how I feel. So to hear that makes me feel a little bit better.
Well, also, maybe I just want to point this out or like hold you accountable a bit and say that your education status should not play any factor in your identity, because I've heard you mention it on another podcast another interview that you did, and then you've brought it up a couple of times about educated podcast versus non-educated podcast. And I just think, like, Jason, you're a very entrepreneurial, very clever, very witty and funny person. Who cares what education level you have? Don't put yourself down and don't let that be part of your identity. You're beautiful.
Am I are we dating right now? Am I falling in love right now? Thank you. I think honestly, that's kind of what this project has been for me in terms of like how much I'm learning about myself and learning about conversation, because again, I am somebody who has been operating not in a way where I'm not educated in the decisions I make, but more so responding and reacting to my business, right? So, and again, I've gotten myself into a really, really great place, but I think looking back on it, I wish that there was a little bit more strategy. So when I look at things that have strategy, like that First Look podcast that you came out, where you really wrote, in each and every delivery, in each and every quote, you follow up and you start it and you cue it up. And I thought that was just so strategic, which is so different from me. Were you always that kind of person? Is that like, are you just thought out and kind of plan everything? Is that how you operate?
Yeah, I would say yes.
Yeah.
I often talk about this in the context of the Enneagram. Are you familiar with the Enneagram? Partially. Okay. And for your listeners who maybe aren't at all familiar, the Enneagram is this like really old, and by old I mean thousands and thousands of years old, way of kind of categorizing different personality traits. And so the idea is that there's kind of 9 core personality 9 core personalities, and then you kind of take bits and pieces from them to kind of form what would be your own personality identity, I suppose. So I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, which is very driven, very ambitious, very I'm a go-getter, and I do think things through strategically. I map things out. I love a good plan. I make a plan. I follow a plan. I see it through to its completion. Like that's I think always been part of my personality, absolutely. And the Enneagram was something that when I learnt about it, it just gave me language and the tools to understand that better for myself, and I guess made me feel really seen in that as well. Like, there's other people that I can find in the world who also think and see things this way.
Yeah.
And, I've recently, so my other podcast that I do, it's called Profit on the Margins, and I sit down with my friend in Austin who together we just chat like business and leadership from a queer perspective, and so his name's CJ, and he's also a 3 on the Enneagram, but we're actually, and the deeper you dive into the Enneagram, you can learn about the maturity of where you're at, or based on your personality type, and CJ is such a secure, mature 3 on the Enneagram, and I am like an insecure, vulnerable, young, like, don't tell me anything negative because I'm going to take it to heart. Like, that's me,
Yeah, that's so okay. So are those like things that you then apply when you're looking and working with clients? Because you do wedding photography is your main source of business, right? How did you get into it, and do you think that those things apply when you're actually looking for the right clients? Are you in a place right now where you're picking your clients?
Okay, so many things here that I want to touch on. We've been talking about the First Look podcast. I'm literally writing the script of the final part, and in it, the opening line is, "How did you get into wedding photography?" This is the number one question that people ask me, and it's really hard. I'm literally just spurting out verbatim what the script is. So you've already heard the first.
We're getting an inside scoop, everybody. We're getting an inside scoop on this.
It's a question I get asked most often, and it's also one of the most complex questions for me to answer because there's layers of like the dynamics there are how deep do we want to go in terms of my own personal trauma and my upbringing in a religion and my internalized homophobia actually all play into the truthful answer of how did you get into wedding photography. And so I usually just say, oh, just like a friend asked me to, be his assistant as a wedding photographer, and I learned from him, and that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
That's not the end of the story.
No,
the story goes deeper
on this podcast. I want that. I want the darker, messier, twisty version of that one.
Yeah, great. Yeah. We'll get there. And before I do, I just want to answer your other question, which is around like whether the Enneagram plays into the clients that I'm choosing to work with and all of that. And truthfully, I actually don't think that that's the case, and rather something that we talked about off mic before, and we might get into later on, is actually more thinking about the psychographics of what do my clients want, what do they want at the end of the day, and is that what I have to offer them? And so kind of reverse engineering that to go, am I the type of photographer that's going to answer all of their needs? And the needs aren't just they want beautiful wedding photos. Like it's deeper than that. But getting into the psychology of, are they worried about the environmental impact of their wedding? Well, I'm probably a good option for them. Are they worried about not being affirmed for their queer identity? Well, I'm probably a good option for them. And those things actually are deeper than, do we have the same personality type?
I mean, shit, I feel like I'm not thinking hard enough about my clients. I mean, I think that's probably the difference between where I probably fall in this Enneagram, which I'm going to have to look into it, because I feel like I've done that before, but it's been quite a while. How old are you again?
I'm 26.
Okay, so I'm a little older than you. I'm in more the tired area where I've given up. But okay, so then kind of going back to the main question is how, kind of going into that trauma thing. What was your first job? Let's start there.
Oh, yes. Okay, I had to think about this. I didn't actually have to think about this because I knew the answer. I worked in an ice cream shop.
Okay. That's that. I feel like there's a link between hospitality people / wedding people with ice cream shop jobs, because so far a lot of my interviews have had people that have worked in ice cream shops.
No way.
But I don't know if that might be a generational thing too. I don't know. Because
well, okay, I'm going to be real technical and picky now and say that I didn't work in an ice cream shop, and I've done that shop a disservice.
It wasn't an ice cream shop?
It was a frozen custard shop.
Ooh!
I know, huge difference.
Now you got bougie. now we know you're international, because it was not some basic Rite ice cream.
No,
it was not.
It was the good stuff. It was the good shit.
Okay,
and
custard.
So, and I get this question all the time, what's the difference between ice cream and frozen custard? The difference is the egg content. So if you have more than 5% egg in your cream mixture, then it's custard. And if you have less than 5% egg, it's ice cream. And so it tasted, I mean, like ice cream, but better. It was like a soft serve because there was no air bubbles. So it was really thick ice cream, and it was just cold custard because it had a little bit of egg in it.
I mean, what the fuck? I literally worked at Cold Stone, and I'm not supposed to. I'm in.
They were our competitors.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting.
Well, in Australia, it's called Cold Rock, so clearly they've borrowed the name.
It's called Cold Rock?
Cold Rock.
I had no idea. Cold Rock.
Yeah.
Were there different sizes? Phrased after, like, you gotta like it, you gotta love it? Was that?
Oh gosh,
that's how we did it here in the
Oh,
States.
I have no idea.
Very,
maybe.
it feels very colonizing already. Maybe we should just move on. We should move on from this out. So okay, so yeah, I mean, even your definition, even the way that you explain custard and ice cream is so much. It feels so much more educated than me. I don't know why, but I think it's also the accent. I don't know if that's something that has anything to do with it. And I know for you, we have the accent, right?
Well, I mean, you would accept that I interact on a daily basis with people with American accents.
Yes.
So it's not novel to me.
Yeah.
Whereas everyone that I speak to here and everyone who's American, like the Australian accent is quite novel.
I mean, it's beautiful. It's
Thank you.
it's honestly one of my favorites. And if you can just do my intro while you're here, that would be great.
Hello and welcome to the Rheeality podcast. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Jason Rhee.
Yes, I love it. I'm gonna leave. Okay, so do you feel like you've worked in the States with weddings and you work over the pond? Is that how I say it?
Across the pond?
Across the pond. Do you feel like, is there a difference in markets? Do you feel like there's different wants and needs?
I think that the market over here is way bigger, which means that businesses can afford to niche down even more. And that's not a luxury that a lot of businesses have back home. Just because it's a smaller market, you try to appeal to more people broadly, which is not my favorite way of marketing and building a business. I would much rather speak to a very specific type of person. And again, just to underscore that specific type of person is not age, gender identity, and income bracket, but the specific type of person is what are their wants and needs and desires. The more I can hone in and be really specific about that, the more I enjoy the business that I'm building.
Yeah.
But in Australia, you have to be a little bit more flexible and broad with that because it's just not the market for it.
What is your couple's wants and needs? Do you know?
Well, I think I touched on that earlier.
Yeah.
So it's like, specifically it's people who want to be celebrated and affirmed for who they are. And that speaks, I think, a lot to people in the queer community, which I'm a member of. And
yes,
yes, queen. So people who, because, and this is something I touched on in my First Look podcast, is 90% of queer people expect to experience discrimination when planning a wedding.
that's really sad.
9 out of 10 queer people think that they're going to find someone discriminating against them while they plan a wedding. It's so upsetting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So for me, it's like, that's absolutely what I want to be targeting in my messaging, is like, you will find safety with me.
Yeah.
And that's not exclusive to queer people.
It's just
that's the message is everyone is welcome.
Yeah.
And I will love to celebrate your wedding day regardless of your age, your race, your gender identity, your sexual orientation, your body size, your religion, your ability, like whatever that is.
Yeah.
And if I can craft my messaging to a space, and I had a couple just book me the other day and they said, look, not a lot of people know this, but we've just, one of them had just been diagnosed with MS. And they're like, I'm not sure how mobile I'll be on my wedding day. But when I came across your work and your website, everything that you say made me feel like you are the type of person who I'll be able to trust regardless of what the MS is doing to my body that day.
Oh my God, that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Like it's such a tragic situation or a challenging situation while you're kind of also planning this next chapter of your life, but amazing that they were able to find you and connect with you.
Yeah, and it was such like an affirmation for me of like, oh shit, yeah, this is why I go out on my way to communicate those things, because if you don't, then people don't feel seen.
Yeah. And do you think that, I mean, now I'm only because I've been born and raised in the States, I really don't know how, I mean, in the last 2 years, I've just found out how problematic everything has been rooted here in America.
Yes.
Do you feel like there is faster change? Do you feel like the conversation of change had happened before 2020 where you're from, or do you feel like it's all kind of relative?
2020 was still a really pivotal point, I think, in the conversation around racial justice in Australia. We've got a really different history when it comes to talking about colonization and, in terms of stealing land off of the Aboriginal communities that live in Australia. And so Aboriginal Australians are the longest living cultural group in the world. They've existed for 70,000 years.
Oh, wow.
And so what's happened is, in a space of 200 years, colonizers have come and wiped out so much history and culture. And it was not something that I learnt about in school. It was like, you did let's talk about the white Australian history that started in 1777 or whatever. Gosh, I don't even remember now. Clearly it stuck with me. And you'd learn about that for the semester or whatever, and you might spend like 1 week looking at like what was the impact on Indigenous communities. And it just felt like such a, it just passed us by. It was such an afterthought. And all that I really knew about Aboriginal culture growing up was that they made beautiful artworks. We had this great big mural in my school, this Indigenous artwork, and I didn't really know much about that piece, which I would have loved to have learnt more about that piece and who painted it and where did they come from and what was their story. But yeah, I think that what's really happened in the last couple of years, and 2020 being, I think that reckoning for racial justice globally was that we've started, I think, more purposefully having the conversation around what we talk about in our society. Oh my gosh, my words have stopped working right now.
No, I'm following. I'm also just getting educated right now.
Yeah. So we're having a conversation in Australia now about truth, treaty, and voice. And so we've just recently had an election. We've elected a new government that's committed to having a referendum for our constitution. I feel like I'm rambling, so tell me to slow down if I need to.
Keep going. No.
So our constitution does not have recognition of Aboriginal people as like the traditional custodians of the land, and that needs to change because, as far as the constitution is concerned, Australia began on a certain date in the 1700s or whatever, when what we've already covered is actually Australia and people living on the continent of Australia have been there for thousands and thousands of years.
Wow.
So the truth is about telling the truth in schools and having what's called a Makarrata Commission, so actually having like government recognized truth about the history of what has happened to Aboriginal people. Treaty is actually because Australia is, I think, one of the only colonized countries in Australia that has not signed a treaty between the colonizers and the colonized. And so what that's meant is that the pathway to healing for a lot of Aboriginal people has been really hard, and the arm of extending the arm of respect and justice toward Aboriginal people from the government has not really happened in a formal setting.
Yeah.
And so having a formal treaty that lays out whose land this was and whose land this is, and that we live on stolen land is really important. And then voice is like the last kind of thing. So truth, treaty, and voice. Voice is that Aboriginal people are calling for a voice to Parliament, where they have like legislated and enshrined power within the system of government to either veto certain legislation,
Yeah.
or at least to, have a voice sitting in the room to
Yeah.
say, this is what we actually think, to build upon what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
That's actually not going to leave Aboriginal people behind. That's actually not going to destroy certain like heritage sites and cultural landmarks and those sorts of things. So
Equity.
Yeah. 100%.
That's so beautiful. I mean, it's sad and beautiful because it feels so relatable, but in different ways. And again, the way that you say it, it sounds so much more beautiful than the way that I was going to say what's going on here, which is essentially not the same thing, but I think we, in the same way are advocating for Black lives. And I think that was something that we never spoke about in 2020. So just understanding even the Indigenous side and how that whole thing works, it's very relatable, but also I hope that I hope it's happening a lot quicker than I feel like it's happening here. And we're also I feel like we're taking steps back from it. So
yeah, that's really interesting. I was chatting with a friend just the other day about it, and I think from my perspective as an Australian, I should also maybe add a quick caveat to say that I'm white. And so
yeah.
What?
Oh my god!
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe on the video people could see, but in the audio, I'm white. So when I talk about these things in terms of like Aboriginal history and culture, like I can only speak to a certain level of knowledge about what that's like, and I don't have lived experience. But to just come back to what we were talking about, the way that kind of my perspective as an Australian just currently in America is seeing how what you have here in the States, which is something that I find commendable, is that as I guess like part of a cultural identity is that people really speak out.
Yeah.
And they speak out to all extremes.
Yeah.
For better or for worse.
Yeah.
And so then what you have is a real division between the way that people want things to be, and that can be helpful or harmful.
Yeah.
In Australia, we don't speak out as boldly and almost, I don't know if this is offensive, but almost we don't speak out as entitled to
have a right or a say
that our
it's
opinion is
my country.
the right one.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a little bit more, and this is generalized, but there's a little bit more social cohesion in Australia.
Yeah.
And that when we do disagree, the disagreement is not to the levels of extremity that kind of happen, at least from what I see in America.
Yeah.
So there's work to do, but I think we're all a little bit closer to where we want to be.
Yeah. I think the fact that we're having the conversation is a pretty great place to be compared to where we were before, where I think what we learned, you can find it on all streaming platforms. Bye. The current life. And I think that's the big difference that I'm seeing now too, where we may have dabbled into Martin Luther King as history, but we never actually gave them the equity, but also the right, but also understanding that they still exist.
And that racism is systemic.
Yes.
And it exists in all facets of life.
And it's not over. And I think that's like the misinformation that we're all like working through. But we're going to take a little break, and, we're going to come back and get more deeper.
Okay.
Are you enjoying this episode of the podcast? Do you like Hank Paul? Well, then why don't you listen to his podcast, First Look, How Marriage Equality is Transforming the Wedding Industry. Welcome back to the Rheeality Podcast. We're here with Hank Paul from Over the Pond? Across the pond.
Across the pond.
Dang it!
Hey, there's no rules. We can be over the pond.
I mean, we got into a pretty heated, a very, very interesting conversation just about, again, I think representation. And I think the thing I love about this conversation so far is that's how we connected. You came in and we connected about LGBTQ. Is it LGBT? Do you call it LGBTQIA?
I say LGBTQ plus.
Yeah.
But for me also, like, my go-to is whatever works for you. So for me, LGBTQ plus works.
Yeah. And so kind of reconnecting our conversation, we obviously went into, similarities of what both of our countries are dealing with and how everything is happening right now in the world. But kind of going back to one of the first questions I asked you is, you had mentioned that there's part trauma to how you got to what you do, right? Mm-hmm, Let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
Now, are we talking like trauma as in being othered because you are a gay, you identify as a gay male? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. I am a gay male.
I am a gay male. It's a weird thing to say out loud, actually.
I know. It's really interesting because I used to hate. I mean, I used to feel so uncomfortable just talking about sexuality when I wasn't out.
Sure.
But also, like, I feel like I was. I mean, people had outed me before I even came out.
Yeah,
You know?
I think like also now we're again tangential to the question you asked, but like saying I am a gay male then still feels a little bit too boxy for me because I'm like, well, male, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah. Do we like? What's like? Is there?
I just love queer.
Yeah.
I'm definitely queer. There's no question about that.
It's so interesting. I'm still not comfortable with queer yet because it's
Sure.
not something I ever identified with, but I also can't really say that I feel comfortable with the word gay either.
Well, okay, let's go to this question
Yeah.
of how did I get into photography, because it's also going to answer maybe part of why the word gay is one that I struggled with.
Yeah.
And why queer is something I love. So for me, the way that I got into wedding photography was I was raised in a very religious family. We went to church, and at my church, I had this mentor. And so he was also a wedding photographer by trade, and he went out of his way to really like invest a lot of his time in mentoring me as like a spiritual guide, I suppose.
Okay.
So just like, like we would have conversations about scripture and the Bible, and
Got
we would
it.
have conversations about prayer and what we were praying for. We'd have conversations
But he was like a
about-
person in your church.
Yes.
Okay, got
it. Yes. And he was a wedding photographer.
Yeah.
So the mentor relationship then evolved into, hey, do you want to come and work with me? I'm photographing weddings. I'll pay you. You can come be my assistant.
Yeah.
And so that is literally how I got into it. So my journey into the wedding industry was directly tied to my journey as a person of faith.
Yeah.
And as a queer person of faith, because what I learned, not only did I learn about how to set my shutter speed and how to light an image with the sun, I was also learning how to speak to clients, how to like handle rowdy guests at a wedding, and most significantly, one of the skills that I learnt from my mentor was how to very politely decline queer clients who were having a quote unquote wedding that didn't align with our religious views.
And at that time, during this time, were you ever questioning your sexuality at the time?
Oh, 100%.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
got it.
Yeah.
So you were already going through the
Yes,
self-shame and all the...
Yes, and the internalized
Got it.
homophobia only deepened with those experiences.
Wow.
Because what I was kind of shown both in a church context but now in a work context was queerness was something that we avoided and we politely declined. And we didn't say, no, we can't shoot your... And it's wedding in inverted commas because they weren't legal at the time.
Yeah.
But we can't photograph your wedding because we're busy, not because you're gay.
Got it.
So it's like there's a lie underneath that as well, which felt really yucky to me.
I mean, that's just so contradictory.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So contradictory. Yeah.
Yeah, talk about righteousness and oh my Lord. Anyway, so for me, like that's all intertwined into how did I get into wedding photography. And for the first 5 years of my career, I did the things. I was like, I said no to a trans couple and I only photographed straight white Christian couples that looked pretty on a magazine. Like that was my ideal client.
Yeah.
And I just thought I had to. I thought that's what was normal in the wedding industry. That's what I saw.
All while you were secretly hating yourself. Now, were you,
Yes.
and again, I don't know if this is too personal, but were you exploring your sexuality at that point yet? Or
like, does porn count?
yeah,
Like,
I mean, porn, like, you know,
that was all I knew for
I'm
a really
like a
long
child
time.
of AOL, so
Sure.
we were, I mean,
sure.
like, Dateline Catch a Predator, like, I definitely started way too early, but I did the same thing in the sense of I kept looking for communities to call myself, you know, a part of, right? Like I wasn't finding it in the Asian community because they were also very homophobic, but you know, it didn't feel right for me. I had a lot of white friends, so then I would continue to go to these white spaces, but then I would find them in different religious places. So I was I was looking into Mormonism because I thought it would help me turn straight, but also majority of my friends at the time were Mormon. And then I tried the Christian spaces. And so it was this constant searching for my people while also hating myself and not like letting myself authentically feel and be. But I also didn't think I had the resources at that time to even understand like, what the other option was. I wasn't learning about gay life in any way.
I only knew one gay person for the first 22 years of my life.
Wow.
And he was my sister's ex-boyfriend.
Yes.
And they broke up and then he came out and, so...
And now you're together.
No, that's not the end of that story, unfortunately. He is gorgeous, though.
Shout out to you.
Shout out to Hayden.
His name is Hayden?
Yeah.
Oh, fuck. That just sounds pretty. Oh, my... Hayden? Oh, please.
So, for a really long time... That was all I ever saw. And, you talk about visibility. And that's the only person I ever saw, and I explicitly remember conversations with my parents where it's like, I remember once as a kid watching some reality TV show and it was about people who keep too many coupons, right? And so there were these, one of the main characters was clearly gay and was lying in bed with his male partner and they were looking at coupons in bed together, right?
Yeah.
I remember this so clearly. And I was like, Mom, why are these two men in bed together? And she's like, oh, they're just good friends. I remember that. I was probably
I've had those good
10. Oh, yeah, I bet you have.
Yeah.
And counting coupons, hey?
I mean, ooh, the amount of paper cuts,
Oh, yeah.
let me tell you. Let me tell you. That's such an interesting experience because you essentially found what you love to do in such a...
It was a really, like a harmful environment for me. And what I'm sure you and I both have experienced in our time in the wedding industry is this is an industry that is evolving and is changing, but has roots in heteronormativity, right?
Absolutely.
And there's no question. No one would argue that.
It's funny because as a wedding planner, I fell into the demographic of the wedding industry that is also socially acceptable to be gay. So I can go into like Republican, very conservative, not very religious spaces and still be okay because I'm the hairstylist or I'm the wedding planner.
Yeah.
And so when I would do and again, I've done weddings in the South where everybody was just inclusive and it felt loving and everything. But I also realized that there could have been privilege there because I am a wedding planner. So I'm coming in being the...
You fit a stereotype.
I'm allowed to.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's been something that's been very interesting. But I also find myself at times being extremely present in knowing that I somehow got myself, maybe through survival and through trauma, but I got myself into a position where I can authentically live my life and be as proud and as loud and as queer and as gay and as flamboyant as I want to, and then somehow find people that celebrate it. So it's been almost like this, I look back on all the painful moments. And again, I have my own, homophobia too, where I remember specifically not being kind to friends of mine that were gay or I think even trans, and I never gave them the respect that I think that they gave me.
Yes.
Because they saw me and I saw them, but I was so fearful
Yes.
to even be aligned with them. And at that point, I just wasn't able to even show up for them because I couldn't show up for myself.
Oh,
right?
I resonate with that so
Yeah.
much.
And that's probably why we spend time doing what we do and advocating for.
It's like an overcorrection.
Well, and it's so interesting because even now, I feel like, I don't know if gatekeeping is the right word, but I feel like I do get protective of my couples. But I also find myself asking, one of the first questions I'll ask if I'm doing a queer LGBTQ wedding is as I'm procuring the vendors and like looking for the venues, is making sure that we're in safe spaces.
Yes.
Which, I live in West Hollywood, the city, the Rainbow Road is here, but I still find myself still being pretty surprised at how not inclusive people can be and how, and again, I think at the end of the day, I also struggle with this whole idea of inclusion, where I understand that like being inclusive may or may not mean you have to include everybody, including those that are not, even the ones that are not open and kind. I don't know if that.
Yeah, I always have a caveat when when you work in the inclusive space, and you get that a lot. Like,
Yeah.
I put up some thing on some reel on Instagram, and a troll was like, "I don't feel included," and I was like, "Ugh," but. So people always find excuses to kind of poke holes at this argument of inclusion. But for me, I'm like, it's inclusion with a caveat that you are not harming anyone. Like that for me is, and that you can be harming someone just by entering a space that you shouldn't be in, right? And so I'm like, well, we can have queer spaces that are exclusive for queer people, and then you can have other queer spaces that invite allies but are still exclusionary to people who are going to come and bring harmful views and say harmful things and dead name people and use wrong pronouns intentionally and that sort of stuff, right? So I'm like, inclusion still is a bit of a spectrum for me, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with a bit of grey. I'm okay with a bit of nuance. I can have those conversations. I don't think it needs to be this like catch-all. We all have the same understanding of the word in all contexts.
Because the truth is we don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the truth is, even though you and I have many experiences being othered, you being white or white passing or whatever the phrasing would be, and me not having that same experience or identity, I think that's been the most I think that's like maybe the trickiest part of not even being an ally or advocating for human rights or anything like that. But I think that's where we get tripped up, because we're all, at the end of the day, human beings that operate based on how we feel and how we know and what we know. So I also gained a lot more empathy in 2022 than I did in 2020 and 2021. I was definitely coming from a very angry, unhinged place in 2020, but I'm beginning to also process that it took me 30-something years to pay attention to this conversation, and I am definitely an other. So to not be an other at all, or to be privileged and not experience any of those kind of traumatic experiences, to then just try to get it overnight is also probably not as easy. So I've kind of found ways of calming myself in some of those spaces, but at the same time I can so quickly get angry at how stupid people can be. And just how frustrating it feels to just not understand. I mean, I just can't understand why people can't understand. Like, just give everybody the fucking right to be free. With their bodies and with their life choices. Just, and again, I think harm is probably the best way to delineate it. It's as long as it's not causing harm, then let you be.
And I think like that was really helpful for me as well, in terms of coming to terms with what I thought about religion and faith. Was, I'm now kind of in a space in my life where I would identify as a reluctant agnostic. Like that's for me how I feel about
Is that on
my
your dating profile?
It should be. Any other reluctant agnostics out there, hit me up.
Swipe up, everyone. Swipe up.
But I do explicitly remember the moment in my life where it's like, oh gosh, I do not want to date another gay Christian, because this is like, there's too much trauma and I have my own, and I don't want anyone else to have to deal with that at the same time. But where I was getting to was in terms of like, everything's permissible as long as it's not harming anyone. And so for me, that's like the agnosticism, is to go like, look, whatever works for you, whatever you believe, if that gives you joy and life and purpose, I love that. I'm really, really happy for you. So long as what you believe doesn't actively harm people, I can get behind it. That's fine. But the moment you say, well, my religion makes me exclude you, or my religion tells me that you aren't going to heaven, or whatever shit you come up with because of your religion that's actively harming or excluding people, then I'm not okay with that. I'm not about that at all.
Well, I mean, so speaking of joy, what do you think brings you the most joy with what you do?
Oh. Damn. What a question. What brings me the most joy in what I do? So because I do a variety of different things, I feel like I'm going to have a variety of different answers. Specifically wedding photography. It's the most rewarding thing. And then maybe I would equate that to joy in giving someone the gift of documenting memories. That brings me a lot of joy, and I don't think that will ever get old for me.
It really is it really is a magical experience, even for me as a planner and designer who then gets the same reward from the work that you put in.
Yeah.
Because again, we would be nothing without the photographers that capture the experiences,
thanks,
right?
thanks,
That's the
Jason.
truth.
Keep going.
Yeah. But also, we play a part in the day too. So. No, but I think that's a really beautiful answer. And then in terms of how you advocate and I guess just being an educator, right? What do you think is the most rewarding for you?
So that for me then turns into and this is where I'm like, the space of being an educator is something that is more and more appealing to me because I think the impact can be greater.
Yeah.
And the work that I've been doing, so I have an online course called Queer Wedding Ally Training, and I teach wedding professionals how to be better allies in their business. And so then hearing the feedback from either the businesses or even like couples who then interact with those businesses to say, like, I felt seen or I felt understood or this person made me feel really safe. I'm like, great, it's not my business, but I got to help plant the seed of what inclusion can feel like in those businesses.
Yeah.
And I look for those signs of safety for my own life, in my own life, when I sign up to a gym, when I go to a barber and get my hair cut. Like, I'm looking for signs of safety everywhere I go as a queer person.
Signs of safety. That's I like that.
Yeah, that's a bit of alliteration there.
Yeah.
So because I'm looking for that myself, the moment that I know that I've had an impact in another business to create those signs of safety, like, that's so rewarding.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Signs of safety.
Yeah.
I mean,
trademark that.
Yeah, I know. Okay.
That's a good book title right there.
I know. So, okay. So far I feel like I've really gotten a good gist of how much it takes for you to also educate, because you are a really educated person, and not just in like the traditional book sense that I talk about, but also in just life. You have a lot of experience, and I think, again, for me, trauma and the dark stuff is just as important as the light stuff, the wins and the woes. Like, I think that's all wraps together. What do you think is kind of one of the biggest misconceptions about you in terms of how you educate? Like, it can be with your brand or with you personally. Do you think there's a misconception, or do you think you're pretty...
I think maybe this is a generic answer, and maybe people have said this before, I'm not sure, but I think the misconception that probably a lot of entrepreneurs experience is that we've got it all together.
Yeah.
I think that's a misconception that people might have about me, is that, oh, there's Hank, he's got it all together.
Yeah.
Because I've run my own business since I was 18. Like, I've only ever known as an adult being a business owner. And so then I think with that comes some level of like forced maturity in that you need to know where you're going. You need to figure out a whole bunch of shit for yourself, because you don't just get that weekly pay packet in your bank account.
Yeah.
So because of that, I think then from the outside looking in, I appear to be really sorted. And I would maybe argue that I've still got a lot of shit to sort out.
Yeah, that makes me feel better, because I would say that I assume that you have it all together, but also hearing kind of, again, your history and hearing again how you even got into this industry is really fascinating, because I think, and again, I don't want to say that like being othered makes me a better person, but I think I've learned so many amazing experiences, both good and bad, because of my because of being othered, and I don't in any way think I don't know if I would choose something different. I don't know, because I've gotten to experience so much, and I think that's maybe where, as I continue to do my self-help and therapy, maybe I'll figure out what the fuck is wrong with me, because I do find, being able to relate through all the good and the bad things, I think makes us kind of a better community person.
Yes.
And I think as many of the educators that are actually doing it for the right reasons are doing right now, which is, I think we just want to make it a little bit easier for somebody else. And, if we can share our roadmap to how we got there and how we built it, then why the fuck not?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, why the fuck grab a fucking mic and speak on it and share it? Because I think if we don't, I mean, we end up just kind of repeating history again, because that is what's been done for so long. We just kind of let it, you know, we don't need to talk about it. Let's not.
And again, just to tie that back, like that's, I think, something that I really admire about kind of American culture is you folks do grab the mic and talk about it. And that's something that, you know, in Australia, we face entrepreneurs and people who are striving for success. We face tall poppy syndrome. It's just cultural. It's like part of our cultural DNA that as soon as you see someone doing well, they're a tall poppy in the field, you cut them down.
I've never heard of that phrase.
It's so Australian. Anyone in Australia will know it. Tall poppy syndrome. It's such a thick part of Australian culture. And for me, I'm like, oh, this is really suffocating. This is really hard for me to.
Why is that a part of the culture? Like,
I mean, why is anything a part of any culture?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like,
so
that's a big question.
So basically, seeing other people thrive.
Cut them down, bring them back down to everyone's level. No one's better than anyone else.
Oh, got it.
And so what I see different in the US is that entrepreneurialism and ambition are really rewarded and idealized, and everyone's like rooting for the underdog. Like the startup culture, like yes, you have a lot of failures, but people are able to take the risk and not lose out you know, their entire reputation on a bad business. You know, whereas something like that, if that occurs in Australia, like it's really hard to bounce back from that sort of stuff because people don't rally in the same way that they do here. And so you find people not being as like not taking risks as much in business and in life.
Hearing that perspective makes me hate America a little less.
But
also here in America, we also have, you know, weeds that pretend to be poppies. And so they're just like loud and proud. And it turns out that they weren't even fucking poppies to begin with.
And you also have really poor gun legislation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, how many more hours can we talk about fucking the problems of this country? But I think if anything, this is totally not where I thought our conversation was going to go today. But I'm so happy that you came in so authentically and so open because, A, you taught me so much, but also you made me kind of appreciate a little bit about what our country has, which is something that I have not said in a very long time. And I don't want to say that we're doing everything right, but I do think that that's really what I know is that's how I started, and that's kind of how I started my business. And I've been celebrated through all the good things and also some of the bad. And I think, if anything, that's all I kind of want to share with my podcast is making sure that we encourage people to be open and sharing all the great and the not so great, because I have a feeling that it'll connect us way deeper. And there's a lot more of us that, you know, have kind of been through the shits than we realize. And I think, you know, let's all just talk about it a little more.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure to be on, Jason, and to be sitting here with you in person. That's
and I will be coming to you, apparently, with the biggest world pride.
Yes, please come. Yes, everyone should. If you're listening to the podcast, come to Sydney. It's end of Feb, early March. I can't remember exactly the dates, but Sydney is hosting World Pride, and it's going to be enormous. So come and march across the Sydney Harbour Bridge with me.
Get all of your single gay friends ready, because I'm coming.
Yes.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Sweet.
Ooh, wait, don't go yet. Make sure you subscribe and like and follow and transfer me via Venmo. Thanks for listening.